fellow Americans.
What do you have to say about dictators of countries like Indonesia, who we sell weapons to, yet they are slaughtering people in East Timor? What do you have to say about Israel, who is slaughtering Palestinians, who impose martial law? What do you have to say about that? Those are our allies. Why do we sell weapons to these countries? Why do we support them? Why do we bomb Iraq when it commits similar problems?
There are various examples of things that are not right in this world, and the United States is trying. I really am surprised that people feel that it is necessary to defend the rights of Saddam Hussein, when what we ought to be thinking about is how to make sure that he does not use weapons of mass destruction.
I'd like to...
Who are shouting, just a moment.
I'm not defending him in the least. What I am saying is that there needs to be consistent application of U.S. foreign policy. We cannot support people who are committing the same violations because they are political allies. That is not acceptable. We cannot violate UN resolutions when it is convenient to us. You're not answering my question, Madam Albright.
You briefed the press, did you not, when you were there?
Well, I had several jobs. One of my jobs was that of analyst. I also was an interrogator and indeed briefed the press when we, the CIA, wanted to circulate disinformation on a particular issue. Disinformation is not necessarily a lie. It may be a half-truth. And we would pick out a journalist. I would go do the briefing and hope that he would put the information in print.
What was your percentage of success?
We were pretty successful in planting information of a rather rarefied nature. For instance, if we wanted to get across to the American public that the North Vietnamese were building up their force structure in South Vietnam, I would go to a journalist and advise him that in the past 6 months, X number of North Vietnamese forces had come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail system through southern Laos. Now, there is no way a journalist can check that information. That's data derived from radio intercepts, spy in the sky photography. So either he goes with the information or he doesn't, and ordinarily or usually the journalist would go with it because it looked like some kind of exclusive. Go after these gentlemen. I would be directed to cultivate them, to spend time with them at the Caravel Hotel or at the Continental Hotel, to socialize with them, and slowly but surely to try to gain their confidence by dolloping out valid information which was true. And then I would drop into a conversation the data that we wanted to get across, which might not be true. One piece of data, for instance, that we managed to plant in the New Yorker magazine had to do with a supposed North Vietnamese effort in 1973 to develop airfields along the border of South Vietnam. The reason we wanted to plant this information was that we were trying to persuade the U.S. Congress that Saigon should continue to get a great deal of aid, and that the North Vietnamese were the chief violators of the ceasefire accord. That was printed in the New Yorker magazine under the byline of Robert Chaplin, as indeed was a great deal of such information which we tried to circulate.
Frank, A two-part question. What were the objectives of or what was the objective of the CIA? What about the moral implications of what you were doing in feeding this information? Did the objective override the moral implications, moral problems?
Well, the objective of the agency in general is to generate intelligence and get it back to Washington, to get at the truth and make sure the policymakers understand it. When you plant disinformation, you are diverging from that objective, and I think probably in retrospect it was very counterproductive. I am, as an ex-CIA agent, opposed to the disinformation activities in which I was involved. I admit that I was involved, and I think it served no useful purpose. Propagandizing the American public or Congress is not the CIA's job. As to the morality of what the CIA was doing or that particular activity, the war was a very relative thing. It was a relativist environment, and morality seldom came into play when you were operating in the field. In my estimation, a CIA man should be amoral. That may sound pretty shocking to somebody, but what if my morality were that of a Nazi or agent, if you will? You wouldn't want me to be your intelligence officer. Keep the morals out of intelligence. Keep the truth in, and stay away from disinformation.
It would have been more appropriate for Mr. Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address this House according to Article 144, an article which was specifically designed to debate violations of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, which is clearly the case with Mr. Trudeau. Then again, a Prime Minister who openly admires the Chinese basic dictatorship, who tramples on fundamental rights by persecuting and criminalizing his own citizens as terrorists just because they dared to stand up to his perverted concept of democracy, should not be allowed to speak in this House at all. Mr. Trudeau, you are a disgrace for any democracy. Please spare us your presence. Thank you.
And it might sound radical, colleagues, but the answer to war is not more war, it's peace. And peace isn't delivered by the barrel of a gun. It's delivered by diplomacy, by dialogue. You can wish away your continent's history, but we share a continent with Russia. We will sit down with Russia. There will be a negotiated peace, and this organisation should be promoting it earlier rather than delaying it and making sure that more Ukrainians die. Your feigning of sympathy rings hollow. It makes me sick, to be honest with you.
Is the US a functioning democracy? Well, let's have a look at it. It costs $2 billion to become president. They have 25% of the total prisoners in the world. They spend over $800 billion a year on arms, which is more than most of the world put together. They've been at war for 250 years since their state was formed 275 years ago. But they can't afford universal health care. They can't afford the $1.7 trillion debt forgiveness for students. They can't afford a programme for the 17 million children that go to bed hungry. Is this a functioning democracy? What's your idea of a democracy?
We become involved when disinformation poses a threat to the security of our country. It is when there's a connectivity to a threat to our country. It could be a threat, a connectivity to violence. And what this working group does, is precisely what I would think you would want it to do, which is to take a look at the work, the disinformation work that our department has done, and ask the following questions. Do we have policies? Do we have guardrails? Do we have
Yeah,
standards
but here's the
to
problem.
ensure-
We
if I
can't
may
even
just
agree. We can't even
extremely-
agree what disinformation is.
This is-
You
well-
can't even agree that it was disinformation, that the Russians fed information to the Steele dossier. If you can't agree to that, how are we ever going to come to an agreement on what is disinformation so you can police it on social media?
Senator, I have 2 points, if I may finish. Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals
So
are
do you
not
think
impinged.
do you think
Number
COVID
one.
do you think
And number
COVID do
two,
you think COVID
if I may.
do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want you guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation.
You would know this this is a bit of an aside, but in terms of how you think about problem sets, when I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses.
We had a good discussion on ensuring global energy security and adequate oil supplies to support global economic growth, and that will begin shortly. I'm doing all I can to increase the supply for the United States of America, which I expect to happen. The Saudis share that urgency, and based on our discussions today, I expect we'll see further steps in the coming weeks.
Are you worried about
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. The media could have stopped it if they had searched deep enough. If they hadn't reprinted government propaganda, they could have stopped it. But what does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars. Populations don't willingly and with open eyes go into a war. So if we have a good media environment, then we'll also have a peaceful environment.
You killed a million people in Iraq.
That is a separate...
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have the brass neck to be sitting here now urging another Iraq war
George,
after
if
what
I
you've
was
already
still in
done.
Parliament,
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war. Now, I believe in a government that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. Unfortunately, today's Democratic Party does not. Instead, it stands for a government that is of, by, and for the powerful elite. Now, I'm calling on my fellow common sense, independent-minded Democrats to join me in leaving the Democratic Party. If you can no longer stomach the direction that the so-called woke Democratic Party ideologues are taking our country, then I invite you to join me.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think you should be the one to be able to decide when to pull the trigger?
No, sir.
Isn't that what this is about? If you adopt the position that any time you are denied, your particular, and there's 4 groups out there and inspectors, you're the group you headed, anytime you are denied, that ipso facto requires the United States and the Security Council to act on what they said they would do, which is to use whatever means necessary to take on Saddam Hussein so you can get into that particular facility. Is that not correct? Is that not your position?
Mr. Senator, I have a job to do, or I had a job to do, and that was to disarm Iraq in accordance with the provisions of relevant resolutions.
With all due respect, I'm not trying to be confrontational. I'm trying to get this as clear as I can. I really mean this now. You have an absolute logic. You put together a very tight syllogism here. You've indicated that your job is to disarm. The only way you can disarm is to have access. The only way you can have access is either with permission on the part of Iraq, or if denied, forced access, right?
Compelled access. Yes.
Compelled. Well, okay, compelled. You sound like the lawyer and I sound like the military guy. I mean, compelled, where I come from, when my old man said you're compelled, it meant I was forced. I mean, it was a real simple proposition. It wasn't much to debate. Now, there is a clear logic to that. And that's what I mean when I say I respect your position. But that means that whenever you choose a target that warrants inspection and you are denied, that ipso facto, at that moment, the only way your position can be satisfied or sustained is if the UN Security Council or the United States, acting unilaterally, uses force to guarantee access. Is not that true?
Yes, sir.
Now, that means that you get to choose the time and place when we would use force, if we use force.
No, sir.
Of course you do. If you choose the site and it's denied.
And we coordinate with the member states to include the United States.
Exactly.
And prior to us going in, we have their agreement that this indeed is an inspection worth doing.
Okay, inspection worth doing, everybody's agreed it's worth doing, and it gets stopped.
Yes, sir.
At that moment, we're an automatic pilot as far as you're concerned. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I respect that. But now, it seems to me the Secretary of State might have a slightly different problem. Secretary of State might be sitting there and saying, now look over there on that side. Now, I remember so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and the 12 people on this side, they're all the ones that said they didn't want to use force. Now, I'm going to have to go tell the president now that we should, or Secretary Cohen, unleash whatever it takes to get it done. And our military assessment is the same as the majors. The major's assessment is, privately held but publicly acknowledged later, that airstrikes alone aren't going to do this. Saddam's not going to cave on this. So, now here's the deal. I recommended the president have at it and let the chips fall where they may. A reasonable position for the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State to take. But I respectfully suggest, Major, I respectfully suggest they have a responsibility slightly above your pay grade. Slightly above your pay grade. To decide whether or not to take the nation to war alone, or to take the nation to war partway, or to take the nation to war halfway. That's a real tough decision. That's why they get paid the big bucks. That's why they get the limos and you don't. I mean this sincerely. I'm not trying to be flip, because I think, and that's why I said at the outset, the reason why I'm glad you did what you did, we should come to our milk. We should make a decision. But in terms of whether the Secretary of State has no more to consider than you do as the arms inspector, you didn't get in, didn't get my job done, get me in. Period. You made the deal, right? That's the deal. A deal's a deal. Get me in. Scott Ritter, I'm ready to go. It's not how it works. Now, maybe it should work that way. But wouldn't you acknowledge that if you were President of the United States or the Secretary of State, you'd sit there and say, now, okay, old Scotty boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in. They're not going to let him in, so what are we going to do now? We know that France and Russia aren't going to be with us. We're quite confident China's not. We've already run those traps. They're not there. We're not sure where the United States Senate is, but have at it, boys. Go get them. And by the way, Scott and the boys say air power's not enough. I think it's a legitimate debate, Major. I think it's a legitimate debate. But I don't think we should be putting it in the context of, you have somebody up there at state saying, look, how can we weasel out of this agreement? We want to let this guy out there hanging. We're not this. It's a very practical political decision. Same kind of decision General Powell made. Same kind of decision President Bush made. Every president, every Secretary of State has to do it. Like I said, they get paid more than you. Their job's a hell of a lot more complicated than yours. They may have made the wrong decision, and you brought it to light. We should address it. We should say straight up where we are, and we should do it. And for that, I thank you. But it's above your pay grade.
Well, one of the four principal functions of the CIA is to gather intelligence and ideally forward it to the president, the users of information, the policymakers, as they say. There are other functions, however, some of them more legitimate than others. One is to run secret wars, the covert action that's written and talked about so much, like what's happening in Nicaragua today from Honduras. Another thing is to disseminate propaganda to influence people's minds, and this is a major function of the CIA. And unfortunately, of course, it overlaps into the gathering of information. You have contact with a journalist, you will give him true stories, you'll get information from him, you'll also give him false stories. For example, in my war, the Angola war that I helped to manage, 1/3 of my staff was propaganda. Ironically, it's called covert action inside the CIA. Outside, that means the violent part. I had propagandists all over the world, principally in London, Kinshasa, and Zambia. We would take stories which we would write and put them in the Zambia Time, and then pull them out and send them to a journalist on our payroll in Europe. But his cover story, you see, would be that he'd gotten them from his stringer in Lusaka, who had gotten them from the Zambia Time. We had the complicity of the government of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda, if you will, to put these false stories into his newspapers. But after that point, the journalists, Reuters and AFP, the management was not witting of it. Now, our contact man in Europe was, and we pumped just dozens of stories about Cuban atrocities, Cuban rapists. In one case, we had the Cuban rapists caught and tried by the Ovimbundu maidens who had been their victims, and then we ran photographs that made almost every newspaper in the country of the Cubans being executed by the Ovimbunda women who supposedly had been their victims.
These were fake photos?
Oh, absolutely. We didn't know of one single atrocity committed by the Cubans. It was pure, raw, false propaganda to create an illusion of communists, eating babies for breakfast and that sort of totally false propaganda.
The only reason that I'm allowed to ask you this question is because today the federal court ruled that the government doesn't have the right to determine who is or is not a journalist. This is the second election in a row that the court had to overturn your government. Do you still insist on being able to make that decision, and why?
First of all, questions around accreditation were handled by the press gallery and the consortium of networks who have strong perspectives on quality journalism and the important information that is shared with Canadians. The reality is organizations like yours that continue to spread misinformation and disinformation on the science around vaccines, around how we're going to actually get through this pandemic and be there for each other and keep our kids safe, is part of why we're seeing such unfortunate anger and lack of understanding of basic science. And quite frankly, I won't call it a media organization, your group of individuals need to take accountability for some of the polarization that we're seeing in this country. And I think Canadians are cluing into the fact that there is a really important decision we take about the kind of country we want to see. And I salute all extraordinary, hardworking journalists that put science and facts at the heart of what they do and ask me tough questions every day, but make sure that they are educating and informing Canadians from a broad range of perspectives, which is the last thing that you guys do.
Whatever our hopes may be for the future, for reducing this threat or living with it, there is no escaping either the gravity or the totality of its challenge to our survival and to our security. A challenge that confronts us in unaccustomed ways in every sphere of human activity. This deadly challenge imposes upon our society two requirements of direct concern, both to the press and to the President. Two requirements that may seem almost contradictory in tone, but which must be reconciled and fulfilled if we are to meet this national peril. I refer first to the need for far greater public information, and second, to the need for far greater official secrecy. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome, everybody, to Redacted on this Tuesday. I'm Clayton Morris.
I'm Natali Morris.
Hope you had a wonderful holiday with your family. If you got to spend it, it's a little bit of downtime on your Monday. We were off, but we are back, and there's been a lot of news that's happened over the past few hours. It seems like NATO has its hands in just about everything from Serbia to Ukraine, stoking war all across the region. So we're going to look at the very latest at the attacks on Moscow, which unfolded earlier this morning, the response from the Russian military against targets inside of Kyiv, and what this means for a potential escalation in that war.
We also are going to give you an update on the World Health Organization and their pandemic treaty, their power grab to basically make sure that we all live in the United Republic of the World Health Organization. Wherever your country borders are will not matter anymore because this is a binding agreement.
Patrick Lancaster is going to be joining us from Donetsk to give us the very latest on all of the attacks against residential buildings and civilian targets. That, of course, that genocide has been unfolding for the past 9 years, and the unbelievable story continues to unfold there in Donetsk and the People's Republic there. So all of that and more as we've got a very busy Tuesday for you. Redacted starts right now. Welcome, everybody. Hope you guys are doing great, despite some of the craziest clown world news out there. You know, on this show, what we try to do is cover the stories the mainstream media largely ignores, but we also don't want you to come in here and watch this show with a sort of preconceived set of notions that you are going to adhere to for the rest of your life. Our goal is to learn together, and as facts present themselves, we should all be flexible, I think, enough that we can maybe change our opinion or maybe have a way that we can be a little bit more flexible based on the facts as they emerge.
Yes, we try not to be an echo chamber so that there's like one way that you expect us to react to things, because that would be dangerous for all of us. And so Clayton and I had a discussion over the Memorial Day weekend about how to make sure that we're not creating an echo chamber. And we can see from the comments in our chat that so many of you are so open-minded and so willing to look at uncomfortable places. And so we owe it to you to do the same. Yeah. So, we're just kind of like, do we have any sort of stiff joints here that we're being inflexible here or there? This is what we do with our holidays.
Yeah, right. So we had a good discussion about it, and we hope that we can bring that to you. So when you tune into our show, we don't want you to think that this is how it's going to be and it's always going to be this way. No, as facts present themselves, we will present them to you. You know, one thing that an executive once told me at a network that I used to work at, a big network, was that there was an on-air personality every night who had a show. And this person became incredibly predictable, and that's why that person's ratings would always just go down.
Yeah.
It was just and the person said the same thing over and over again. And even as facts presented themselves, and that person never really changed his or her opinion, it became it was this inflexible version. We never, ever want that to happen on this show.
Also, David also pointed this out, and now the chat is going nuts that I say it wrong. Is it echo chamber?
I always say echo, but you've always said eco.
It is echo.
And I'm saying, what am I saying?
You're saying eco like an eco-terrorist.
When I spell it, it's E-C-H-O.
But you say eco.
But I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Yeah. You also say say the electric car that Elon Musk.
Tesla.
Say it again.
Tesla.
No, it's Tesla.
Tesla. That's what I'm saying.
But you're saying it with a Z. There's an S.
Philip, am I saying it with a Z?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you, Philip. All right, let's get to the news, shall we? Let's get to the news, shall we? So remember last week when the Biden administration pretended to warn Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, hey, don't attack inside of pre-war Russia, the boundaries pre-war that are mother Russia. Don't attack inside of there. The Biden administration is absolutely against that, and you absolutely are not allowed to use any American weapons to attack inside of pre-war Russia. Stop attacking civilian areas. The Biden administration is absolutely against that. They told us that from the podium multiple times from multiple different sources, Jake Sullivan to Jean-Pierre to President Biden himself.
Yes, he reiterated after the G7 last week, saying, Zelensky, he gave me a good promise. He's not going to do this.
He's not going to attack.
I looked deep into his eyes.
I saw his soul. Stop attacking. So stop attacking Moscow with drones. Don't do that. Zelensky said, we don't know who attacked the Kremlin and the Belgorod residential areas. We have no idea. We really don't know. Of course, that was a lie. They were lying right to our faces, and you all know that if you watch this show. NATO and Ukraine are actively working together using American weapons, and the United States is actively providing the targets. See how this works? We provide the weapons and the targets, and then you carry out our bidding. That's how this works. And once again, a few hours ago, NATO launched a new round of attacks on Moscow, in which several buildings were hit, residential buildings, apartment complexes. Russia said this about the attacks. The raid involved 8 aircraft-type UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, all of which were hit. 3 drones that were suppressed by electronic warfare measures like EMPs went out of control, deviated from their intended targets, the statement added. The remaining 5 drones were shot down by air defense systems operating outside of Moscow, according to the Ministry of Defense. So, Clayton, why do you say that NATO is involved in this? Because we've drawn a line in the sand on this show. We don't say that Ukraine attacked Russia. It is NATO that attacked Russia. And we're telling you all of this and how they're involved. And I'm going to explain exactly how they're involved. It used to be that our puppet masters pulled the strings in secret, behind closed doors. Now they're openly telling us in broad daylight what they're doing. And we should listen to every word that they're saying because it all comes true. They are telling us publicly, from the podium or in leaked phone calls, what they're exactly doing. Take, for example, Victoria Nuland, the puppet master who helped install a puppet government in Ukraine in 2014 under Obama. Victoria Nuland, you'll recall, openly admitted to biolabs in Ukraine.
I only have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities, which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent
Look at her fiddling with that pen.
Research materials from falling into the hands of
How do I say this?
Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware.
That pen is melting in her devilish hands. We now know, of course, that there are 46 biolabs, U.S.-funded bioweapons labs in Ukraine. This week, Russia says that they've discovered deadly pathogens at one of the particular biolabs and are curious as to why it has a 40% effective kill rate. What are these pathogens that they've discovered inside of these Ukrainian biolabs? Interesting. So you were worried about them getting a hold of it. I wonder why. Then
because they were worried it would hurt the Russian soldiers if they got a hold of them.
That's right.
Lindsey Graham seemed very concerned about not hurting Russians this weekend.
Yeah, he said the opposite, of course, this weekend, which was it's money well spent. The amount of money that we've spent in Ukraine is great, and he's very happy that this money is going to kill Russians.
Yes.
It's literally what a sitting U.S. senator just said. We now know, of course, that these biolabs exist. And then Nuland told us that the Nord Stream pipeline would also be destroyed. She said this publicly before it happened. Listen.
With regard to Nord Stream 2, we continue to have very strong and clear conversations with our German allies. And I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
Look at that smirk. She's so happy about it. And of course, she was excited about it. She told she told Ted Cruz in front of Congress that she was happy that it was now a pile of junk at the bottom of the ocean. So of course, they telegraphed this. They told us exactly what was going to happen. Then the United States and Norway destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, bringing natural gas to Germany and Europe. That all happened. Now Germany is officially in a recession. Of course, that happened last week. Turns out people need natural gas in Germany. And when you destroy their pipeline, people can't afford to heat their homes, right? And so all of this is tied to that. Well, the newest Nuland nugget has just dropped. And this should not come as any surprise, and it should be terrifying to those worried about World War III. Late last week, Nuland admitted on camera during a Ukrainian video call that the United States has been planning the so-called massive spring offensive that Ukraine and NATO are about to launch, and that we've been actively involved in it, like every stage of this planning, for the last 4 to 5 months. Listen.
And even as you plan for the counteroffensive, which we have been working on with you for some 4 or 5 months, we are already beginning our discussions with the Ukrainian government and with friends in Kyiv, both in the civilian side and on the military side, about Ukraine's long-term future.
Yeah, the meetings with BlackRock and everything. So for 4 to 5 months, we've been working actively inside of Ukraine on this planning for this massive spring offensive. So, but I thought, wait a minute, I thought the New York Times last week told us, or 2 weeks ago, reported that Ukraine makes all of their own decisions. Didn't they tell us this? And doesn't share anything with the United States? Here's the quote from the New York Times. Although Ukraine shares few details of its operational plan with American officials. That's the quote. Here's another fake story from Politico around that same topic. They all kind of pushed this same narrative out around the same time 2 weeks ago. Ukraine withholding counteroffensive details from allies. You remember this story? As if the United States doesn't know anything about it. Here's the Politico quote. Kyiv is holding close the details of its spring counteroffensive in an attempt to prevent the leak of sensitive information that could compromise its positions on the battlefield, according to 2 European officials who are in touch with military leaders in Ukraine. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Here's the Politico reporter who broke that story. So take a look at your screen here. About the author who wrote that story. This is a total garbage piece of propaganda story. She writes, Erin Banco is a national security reporter for Politico, focusing on the intelligence community. But by the way, is she the author? Or is the giant ad above her head for Lockheed Martin the author of that article? The giant ad for the military-industrial complex taking up the entire right column of this Politico article. Lockheed Martin. Might as well put like Raytheon in there, or the makers of HIMARS, like right above her head.
And what the hell is Lockheed Martin advertising to the general public for anyway? Is it like, I'm like, actually, I was thinking about buying an F-35. Maybe I will. Maybe today's the day. It's like,
I think it's general sentiment. Yeah. Like, we're supposed to champion them as a recognizable brand.
Right. It's just like brand recognition, right? It's like, we're not going to go out and buy any jets. But hey, if Lockheed Martin is, sponsoring Politico, then hey, maybe Politico's all right with me.
I suppose.
Like, that's how it goes. I mean, this is how the mainstream media lies to you guys, right to your face. So Victoria Nuland admits that they've been actively working on every level of this counteroffensive, and we've known that. Of course, that's just her saying it publicly doesn't really just underlines it for us here on this show. But then you have these other articles from the New York Times, Politico, and others saying, and Washington Post, well, intelligence officials, American officials are upset with Ukraine because they're really just not being open about what they plan to do in this offensive. Such garbage. And then, of course, overnight you have these attacks on Moscow. And then Vladimir Putin responding with attacks on the intelligence and decision-making bodies inside of Ukraine, attacking NATO targets inside of Ukraine, the decision-making centers, as they described it. So this is what happens. We're going to be, and this is exactly what happened a few months ago when, of course, that other attack happened, which Russia calls a terrorist attack. And then they fired and hit that bunker outside of Kiev. And knocking out, and according to a number of sources, a number of NATO sources were hit in that attack as well. A number of NATO high ups were in that attack.
Yes, and equipment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the latest. We're going to be joined by Patrick Lancaster from Donetsk in just a moment. He came under heavy fire. Continued shelling in that region. Of course, this area has been under constant attack for the last 9 years. So we're going to check in with Patrick Lancaster here on the show and see what the very latest media lies for the Western media is telling you about this war.
But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at GhostBed, because Memorial Day has just come and gone, but you're not too late for GhostBed's big Memorial Day sale. It is still going on right now because, of course, we all know this is the unofficial start to summer and temperatures are about to soar. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for cooling mattresses, pillows, and bedding, and for a sweat-free sleep. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts with your body temperature, every GhostBed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips or a firmer option with exceptional support, your GhostBed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. So for cool summer sleep all summer long, head to ghostbed.com to take advantage of their deals. Again, that's ghostbed.com/redacted to let them know who sent you. One more time, that's ghostbed.com/redacted.
Well, the Western media continues to ignore the genocide that's been unfolding in Donetsk, Donbass region over the last 9 years. And over the weekend, NATO and Ukraine bombarded residential areas using U.S.-made HIMARS weapons. Once again, this is a common occurrence that is almost happening daily. They hit a science institute, among other residential buildings. Patrick Lancaster has been covering this genocide for the past 9 years. He was there the moment NATO and Ukraine started launching these attacks. Take a look.
The shrapnel from the rocket seemed to be a Western-supplied HIMARS, and this hole that we saw here is indicative of a HIMARS. We see them come down and just rip into the ground right after they explode, or sometimes they explode after. There's three, at least, different settings for the HIMARS. One is they explode in the air burst. Others pound through and then explode, and others exploding on impact.
Independent journalist and war correspondent Patrick Lancaster joins us now from Donetsk. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. You know, we featured your work on our show for many years here, but it's great to finally have you here on the show, and thank you for your amazing journalism.
Thank you very much, Clayton, for having me. It's an honor to be here. I've watched you guys a lot, and you guys are doing great things for the push of what the mainstream media is ignoring.
So over the weekend, of course, we just played this footage, again, another round of attacks. This is a daily occurrence. And of course, the reports have been that after the fall of Bakhmut, that attention would drive towards this area, to the area that you're currently in Donetsk. What are you seeing on the street? What are you seeing in terms of attacks? And what are you hearing among the people as you go door to door and see how they're living their lives?
Well, of course, the attacks, as always, are just horrible on the civilians. If we could talk all day about the different attacks that happen every day in Donetsk. Maybe not every day on the center, but every single day in the city of Donetsk, there are attacks on the civilian population by Ukraine. I do my best to cover as many as I can, but of course I can't get to all of them. But if we talk about this particular case that you just showed, to give a little bit more in depth on it, I had actually just returned back from the front line. I was just 60 meters from Ukrainian positions and spent a night there and returned back to Donetsk. And I was shocked to see how much more intense the war was in the center of Donetsk than it actually was on the front line. And I had just been back in Donetsk for 20 minutes and heard a few explosions, got as much information as I could on the location, raced to the site, which was, as you said, the Science Research Institute that had took a direct hit from the HIMARS to the roof, which instantly killed a woman. But I arrived on the scene about 25 minutes after the initial attack, and this is what Ukraine did. They waited. They made one attack with 3 HIMARS, waited about 25 minutes until the first responders came to the scene, journalists and first responders, and then, as seen in my footage, I counted about 6, I guess, additional HIMARS that came down right almost in the same spot. Right after the fire department, emergency workers and journalists showed up on the scene, which is a clear violation of the Geneva Convention, waiting to and firing on first responders. But this is what we see from Ukraine on a daily basis. Just the hammering of civilian areas in Donetsk and other areas across the regions that Russia is in control of. And it's just horrible to see on a daily basis.
You're there. Do you see? So the big question from a lot of folks in the independent media is like, well, where is Russia in this right now? Obviously, this is Russian territory now. The people voted to become part of Russia. Russia sees this as Russia. Maybe the Western NATO doesn't see this as part of Russia, but nevertheless, it is. And so, where is Russia in this? Where are the Russian forces? We see in your videos here, Russian military inspectors are inspecting the crash site where these HIMARS. But where are the forces to propel those attacks against the people of Donetsk?
Well, the main problem with the attacks on Donetsk is Avdiivka and the Ukrainian-controlled territory in the area of Avdiivka. And the fact is that these HIMARS rocket launchers are mobile launchers, just like the Oregon Smerch Soviet-made rocket launcher. They're all mobile. So a lot of people think, why doesn't Russia just knock out these launch sites? Well, that's because they'll come out of the woods somewhere, drive to a field, fire, and then within a minute and a half, they're already gone in a new position. So it's a game of cat and mouse. And as we know, Russia is pushing, as we saw. Wagner took Bakhmut, and that is to kind of go back to your other question. There is definitely an increase in attacks after Bakhmut was taken control of by Wagner forces, and in Donetsk, it kind of happens every month or so for the last 15 months. For a week or two, Ukraine will just start lobbing constantly on the center of Donetsk, just knocking out dozens of civilian homes every day. And then it'll just kind of calm down and they'll move on to a different tactic. And they're just wasting all of the Western people's tax money by bombing civilians. I mean, there's no question that the tax funds in the United States and other countries are exactly funding the killing of civilians, the injuring of civilians, and the destruction of civilian properties and civilian infrastructure. There's no question about that. But as far as Russian soldiers go and the Russian forces, there's still somewhat a little bit of a separation. They are all merging as far as the Donetsk People's Republic, Lugansk People's Republic forces, and the regular Russian army. They're starting to merge. The governments are merging, but there's still a separation. Like a few days ago, I was with the internal forces, not necessarily part of the Minister of Defense of the DPR, but a kind of a different branch. And in my reports, I kind of have them explain the differences of the different branches, who's with Russia, who's merging with what kind of battalions and groups. So there's more information coming out of it. But even for the governments now, it's all a new thing for them merging together and who's where. And then you've got other third-party things like Wagner, which is a private commercial fighting company. So
right.
It's a process. Like the process when the Donetsk People's Republic made their own government in 2014. So it's in the works.
In the works. Interesting. Okay. And when you're there in Donetsk, when you were out there yesterday covering these HIMARS attacks on these civilian population areas, were you able to turn and talk with your CNN colleagues or the New York Times colleagues or the Associated Press colleagues or the Washington Post colleagues or the Reuters colleagues or the BBC colleagues who are all there, I presume, right? They're probably there covering Donetsk, this genocide that's been happening for 9 years. Are you guys all together and go to cafes afterwards and talk about it?
No, there's no Western media in Donetsk. I mean, it's very seldom to see any any Western mainstream media people in Donetsk or Donbass for that matter. Occasionally, one or two will come through for a little short story, but for the most part, they're not that interested in what's really happening on this side of the line. They're be more comfortable sitting on the Polish border, reporting on what they can do from there. But as far as you mentioned, Associated Press and Reuters, they do have some freelance people that just kind of, these freelancers, I used to be one myself, where I just film what you can and sell it to the highest bidder. I stopped that when I realized my footage was being lied about by agencies like Associated Press and Reuters, and if not them directly lying about it, them just selling it to a third party and not managing and controlling that third party is actually telling the truth about it. And we can look at a classic example of this with this attack. I filmed this 20. I decided to film it without turning off the camera, 21 minutes. Interviews of workers at the place saying there's no military there, then it was Ukraine shelling. And I come across this this report from an Australian news channel, News 10 First, it's called, and they just totally blatantly lie about this attack and just try to fit the narrative that they think they should be pushing and blame this attack on Russia, which is totally idiotic and lacking of any moral or journalistic ethics.
Russia is again being accused of crimes against humanity after its latest barrage against Ukraine killed at least 3 people and destroyed a hospital.
The peace of a Donetsk neighbourhood also shattered in the same way. A Russian rocket attack sending people running for shelter.
To blame this on Russia. I mean, this is Russian-controlled territory. Of course, Ukraine is attacking this territory like they've been doing every day for the last 9 years, even before Russia came in, when it was more of a civil war. This is able to happen because of these freelancers who just sell their work to the highest bidder. And I assume this Australian news channel just bought it from Reuters or Associated Press from someone that had filmed it, that had bought it from someone that filmed it in Donetsk. Even in their little report saying it's Russia, they run by me while I'm on the ground hiding from these shells. But it's just a stereotypical lying by the Western mainstream media about the situation in Donbass, because all they want to do is hide anything that could be negative for Ukraine or even positive for the Russian people or the civilians. And they just don't want to show you the truth. They want to show you only the half of the truth that fit the Western mainstream narrative.
Well, Patrick, I'll get you out of here on this question. The people, you speak, that's one of the things you do in your reports is you speak to the people, the citizens. You go door to door and you talk to the old ladies who live in these houses and these neighborhoods, and the families that are watching their playgrounds being destroyed, the schools that are being hit, etc. What are the people in Donetsk saying now that they're part of Russia and the shelling is continuing here? What are they saying as the every day this continues to happen?
Well, as the people of Donetsk, as most of the world had assumed once Russia came in, as the story was, 3 days to Kiev, and then they assumed it would all be over. When Russia fully recognized the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic, and then moved in officially, the people of Donetsk and Lugansk, they thought, the dying was going to stop. But not everything works out that way, as we see, but they're praying that things start to move faster as far as Russia taking more territory, because a lot of the people in Donetsk, they have family on the other side, just kilometers from the front line, that their families just waiting for Russia to get to them. And it's hard to see these people going through this and being cut away from their families for so long, because during the last 9 years, there was areas where you could cross the front line, families could see each other or even going around. But now these families are just cut apart and just praying that soon they'll get back together. And they know that to make that happen, Russia has to finish taking the rest of the Donetsk region, or what was the Donetsk People's Republic.
Heartbreaking. And the Western media just ignores this genocide and this tragedy. But someone who doesn't is Patrick Lancaster. He's an amazing journalist. We'll have links to Patrick's channel in the description below. Watch his latest reports. Follow along with Patrick. Really one of the bravest people covering this war. And so thank you so much for your great work, Patrick. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Anytime.
A true journalist. Just think about what it would take to someone to go out there and cover the war in this way. It's absolutely, it takes a lot of bravery to bring this story. Go ahead, Philip.
That bit about the news channels though, like taking that footage, like it almost that a proper news channel like that, like a mainstream news channel has to have somebody vetting footage, to avoid stuff like that, and it just amazes me. So it's like to me it seems like they knew what they were doing and they just didn't care.
Well, what's amazing is I watched that footage a number of times, and Patrick is literally, after the shells went off, he's literally one of the journalists that is on the ground after the shells come in, right by the tree, and you see that other videographer run right by him, and you can see him in that person's video. And then Australia, I saw some people in the chat saying the Australian news is absolutely the worst. It absolutely is. And so, I mean, they're literally lying. They're literally lying to people about what's actually happening there.
That's crazy.
It's unbelievable, and you can actually pick up pieces of shell casings from the United States. Like, it's just incredible. Anyway, we've got more news to get to on your Tuesday night. We're going to look at this pandemic treaty, the World Health Organization. This is probably our number one requested story from our audience. What is the update on the pandemic treaty, and what does this mean for governments giving up their sovereignty to the World Health Organization? We're going to talk about that in a minute. Plus, we're also going to check on what's going on with NATO in Serbia, stoking violence there overnight. We'll bring you the very latest on that. But first, it's no secret. If you're tuned in, you know what we're sitting on right now. Peter Schiff predicting that we are in a massive recession, heading towards a Great Depression. And right now, it's the government continuing to print more money, continuing to further devalue the U.S. dollar. And last year was terrible for investors, if you didn't know it. But if you were invested in gold or other hard assets, you would have been okay. You would have been protected and able to protect your family's wealth. If you're interested in investing in gold, our friends over at Lear Capital can help you get started purchasing actual precious metals. So this is something that Natali and I do on a regular basis. How do we, when we make money from our day job, how do we convert those U.S. dollars then into precious metals, away from government currency, and something that can sustain for a long, long time for our family? So Lear Capital can help you do that. And they have a special phone number. If you guys want to call their 800 number and talk to their team, they'll see if it's a fit for you. They'll walk you through their process. How do you buy gold or silver inside of a self-directed IRA? How do you buy it perhaps also where you have the coins delivered to your house or in the storage location? All of that can be protected, and they can help you with that. Call 1-800-613-3557 or go to LearRedacted.com. That's the website, LearRedacted.com. And right now, you can get $15,000 in free bonus metals with a qualified purchase. So call their 1-800 number, 1-800-613-3557. And go to LearRedacted.com. There are a lot of gold companies to choose from, and Lear Capital has over 25 years experience, thousands of 5-star reviews, and a risk-free guarantee that gives you 24 hours to review your purchase before committing to it. Lear Capital is a top choice when buying gold and silver. So our thanks to Lear for being a longtime supporter of what we do here on Redacted. Free thinkers and supporting, taking care of you guys.
Yeah. All right. Well, get ready to live in the United Republic of the World Health Organization, because the country you think you live in will no longer have powers to govern if your country signs the World Health Organization Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. This is the document we've been discussing at length. What it does is allow the World Health Organization to have all of the power to decide when you're in a pandemic, when you are in danger of a pandemic, and how you must behave your behaviors socially, emotionally, online, your speech. This is what they're trying to do. This was originally endorsed by Boris Johnson and President Joe Biden in 2021. And now here we are in 2023. And the WHO doesn't have a very good, in my opinion, COVID report card. But we still want to hand them global powers over nation states anyway. Now, what the update is, because we've been updating you every time they release a draft of this document, and this, as it stands, that document will be revised and gone over again in July. And then voting will start to take place in 2024 for nations that adopt a full version. So we have some time. I'm very anxious to see that final draft that comes out in July. What we have now is edits to the World Health Organization's articles of international health regulations. And the reason that they're doing this is they have to it's almost like they have to amend their underlying powers in order to give themselves more powers. So they revise this document, and it's worth taking a look at because you can already see how this is going to go based on these edits in the first few pages. Take a look. They're saying, that how we're defining what we're doing here, they just strike the words non-binding, meaning like we're going to give these recommendations, either standing or temporary. But before we used to say that adherence to them, by nation states was non-binding. Now we're like, not interested in that. If you're in the WHO, it's binding. So let's just get that out of here.
So any flimsy language about this not being the law of the land has been removed. It's like now we're getting the full stamp.
Yes.
It's binding.
It's the WHO. Again, remember, this is not the pandemic preparedness document. This is the World Health Organization sort of their underlying powers now based on the extra pandemic powers. So they're already saying like, they're basically drunk on their own power. Like what is it?
He-Man? I have the power.
I am inevitable.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Like they have the
Thanos.
They have the gauntlet.
They have the snap of the
throat. They have collected all 5 stones, Infinity Stones. And they now have all power. So
they are omnipotent.
Sure.
Omnipotent. That's one of my favorite words. So all powerful. That's what the world. Yeah,
okay. Yeah. That. Yeah. And so and then does this power only kick in when we're in a pandemic? Oh, no, it does not. According to edits to this document, it kicks in whenever they feel like we should be preparing for a pandemic. You see the word prepare there, like if we think that they cross out here public health risks, they're saying all risks with a potential to impact public health. Now, I think why we need to notice this is because you see the language ratcheting up, telling us as a society, you have mental health issues. You are very anxietized. People hurt your feelings all the time. Mental health and words are hurting you and have the potential to hurt you. So we can say now, not only do we have to have some endemic disease, but we can also say that there's a potential for a public health risk. And so that gives us the power to say that there may be something at risking the potential to negatively affect public health, right? And will they respect our freedoms, right? No, they just cross that one out here in Article 3. Normally, implementation of regulations would have full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons. No, not interested in that. Just cross that right out. But we will say based on equity and inclusivity and coherence. Yes, please laugh at this. Thank you for laughing at that.
Who is the person that's like, let me get out my pen here, my strike-through pen. This is my special strike-through pen. All right, human rights. Let me scratch that out. Human rights. Dignity? Yes, let's scratch that out as well.
Well, fundamental freedoms is the thing that bothers me the most. Philip, what are you giggling about?
Yeah, the fundamental, it's just like the fact that they crossed off like what kind of just like hard-ass bastard you have to be to scratch out the words like full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons and be like, this will not stand. That's where they're planting their flag.
Yeah.
It's like Thomas Jefferson must be rolling over in his grave. He's like, that's the kind of stuff that I wrote in to the Declaration of Independence, right?
Don't worry, though, because they say that they will make regulations based on their principles of equity and inclusivity and coherence. So like maybe we'll have some gender ideology and some, token people of different colors and stuff like that, like in our board members. So we're being inclusive, but like your fundamental freedoms, we're not that interested in that.
Well, yeah, they took something that's concrete that like you can't argue with, and they made it squishy so that they can argue with it. And that's what they've done. They're like, no, this is, and so it's like they're building in wiggle room.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, Clayton and I were listening to a podcast the other day. I can't remember the name of this guy. And he was talking about how these like ideological Trojan horses come in with the terms like inclusivity and equity and I don't know, diversity. And
ESG,
usually like
ESG.
What they mean when that happens is like, we're going to give ourselves more power. Like this for sure feels like a woke Trojan horse. Okay. Will they maintain the power of surveillance if a small country doesn't know what to do? Yes, they will. Here's Article 5 saying that, look, we're going to tell you need to have the power to survey your population. If you can't do that, developed state parties and the WHO will assist you. So like, okay, you're too small of a country, Cape Verde or whatever. Don't worry, because we're going to have this on lock, this surveillance thing. And what if officials in your government don't agree that there is a health emergency? They don't matter. Here is how that previously was written. Can we go to the next one? That says number 3. It says before the WHO would have to consult with the state party in whose territory the event is occurring. They don't have to consult anymore. They can come into your country and say, you have a pandemic. And if you don't like that and your health officials are like, no, this is not a pandemic. We all have colds or whatever. We're not going to give you no, they decide when you have a pandemic. In fact, it removes altogether the idea that any given state could push back on whether or not there is a public health emergency. See this edit, number 3? Totally crossed out, saying if, the director general and the state party, they don't agree on a consensus on whether there's a pandemic or a public health threat, then this is how you mitigate that. Gone. No mitigation. The WHO is just going to tell you. Like, there's no, sorry. And what about a pandemic? What do we do then? Do we agree on therapeutics, interventions, masking, vaccines, these things? Well, no, the WHO will do that, full stop. It says the WHO will carry out an assessment of all of these things. So, any scientific counterpoint should be basically bound and gagged because the WHO is going to be doing all the science, all of the assessments shall run through them.
Oh, good, because as you know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is responsible for 88% of the total amount donated from all philanthropic foundations. The WHO, 88% comes from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So now all therapeutics, any sort of pharmacological remedies will run through the WHO.
Yes.
Good. See how this works? They
also want just a few other things that I'm not going to show you screenshots because I know that doesn't make for riveting TV, but I want us all to just be aware of it. They want open sourced ingredient list of all vaccines. They want to be able to oppose and implement any travel bans. But there is a provision that would exempt health officials from travel bans. So we've talked about before how World Health Organization employees and board members and what have you, power holders, they don't pay taxes in the States. They have sort of superpowers as diplomats. They don't. They get special treatment in whatever state they live in. They also would be exempted from public travel bans. They want full vaccine and full health passports for travel. This is called the PLF, the Passenger Locator Form. And they want this to be recognized by every state that's a member of the WHO. And they'll have one central website and a QR code to read and authenticate that data. And will they save your personal data? Yes, they will. This draft says that states parties may disclose personal data where essential for the purposes of assessing and managing a public health risk. So yes, there's not one of those like, let's pay lip service to, we'll be careful with your data. It's like, no, you'll give it to us because we'll decide that that's a health risk and we need it. And
I just want to, I'm curious at what sort of military force. I mean, I'm sure the World Health Organization will need its own military now. Like if they're going to go in to try to take, information from people's computers, they're going to try to barge down doors. Are they just going to use NATO to do it? Who are they going to use? They're going to have some sort of a law enforcement agency.
I suppose they will. That's a good question, and I'll have to look at the pandemic treaty because there must be some kind of enforcement. Like, let's say you're the UK and they say, we want to take cell phone location data from each person to make sure that they stay in their house during lockdowns. And if they don't, then X will happen. The British military will serve as an enforcement arm of the World Health Organization, or municipal police. I'm not sure. And I've never seen that written out, and I've gone through this document several times.
They should probably
any state that
so they should probably just start their own military from the ground up. Let's build a massive new World Health Organization military. That's probably what they need to do. Go ahead, Philip.
Yeah, I was just gonna say any state that signs this is out of their freaking mind, because why would any state turn over power to somebody that's not regulated by any state? You know what I mean? Like any government that, like, they're basically saying in this, we can overrule all the governments on the planet. Like if like the idea of a new world order frightens you, this is it in writing.
Yes.
That they're trying to do.
But this, what I'm showing you tonight, is not something they are taking signatures on. This is the underlying power that they are giving themselves. And then the next part is opt-in. So the pandemic treaty is opt-in. This is not really. The World Health Organization is basically changing their articles of operation based on doing that next. So I don't know exactly what any member state of the WHO can do, because they're changing their operating agreements and you're already in. You know what I mean? I'm not clear on that. And I would like a legal expert to make that
It's like being you're an employee of a company and the company decides to change its employee handbook on you.
Yes, that's exactly what this is. They're basically changing their handbook. And now who pays for all of this? Well, the WHO will decide based on your country's GDP, who can afford what, and they will have audits. So look at number 4 that they've added. WHO shall develop an evaluation matrix for assessing the contributions of state parties to the international coordination of public health. So they will go in and audit your books, basically, of your own country and say, you can afford this, you can afford that, you can afford this, which means, they will have to have some kind of in on public finance, on the treasury, on taxes, right? There's some questions. And of course, they throw misinformation bit in there too. Here's their sort of summary of all the things they want to do. Look at E, they want to counter misinformation and disinformation. That information bit is important because the pandemic powers, the document that we can opt into that we've been talking about, they've defined a risk now, a new risk. We talked about this before. In the draft that we talked about in February, it said infodemic defined as ... So we never knew exactly how they were going to define infodemic. We just knew that they wanted to. Now they have. Take a look. I just highlighted it as how they're defining an infodemic. They're saying it's a new health threat. With this new information ecosystem has generated a new health threat called an infodemic. It is the overabundance of information, accurate or not. Let's all digest that for a second, because you can have an overabundance of truth, you guys, and that's bad for you, according to them.
We don't want too much truth.
Makes it difficult for individuals to adopt behaviors that will protect their health and the health of their families and communities. So what they're saying is you could get too much truth, which would make you not take this medicine that we are profiting off of, and we can't have that. The infodemic can directly impact health, hamper the implementation of public health measures, and undermine trust and social cohesiveness. The infodemic cannot be eliminated. It can only be managed, which makes it a perpetual beast that you cannot kill. And that's why the WHO has to have these powers to be constantly at battle with the many-headed monster of an infodemic, right? I am absolutely troubled by the idea that accurate information can be a public health concern. Are you?
You're well, yeah, I mean, if it goes against the their narrative, right? Just like the COVID lockdowns and vaccine rollout, and they wouldn't let you know about alternative therapeutics, which have 30 years track record in history and won the Nobel Prize for medicine. We're not allowed to tell you about those things which are readily available because then someone won't make money. If it goes against the narrative, they can't tell you this.
Yeah.
Even if it's truthful.
You can have too much truthful information and make decisions about your body and your health and your family and your money and your life that they don't like. And that is a public health concern, according to this document.
Yeah, to me, the inclusion of the accurate or not is very much saying that they want to override any scientific data that they don't like, that they don't like the look of. Doesn't matter if it actually proves or demonstrates something to be true. They're like, we don't like it, we don't want it. And how else could you interpret that?
I don't know.
And we should point out, I say this all the time on the show, and I'll say it again right now. We talk about like maybe conspiracy theories. Sometimes people say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. The stories we end up covering here on the show literally come right from their own documents. Like, this is not some guy yelling crazy stuff on the side of the street, hitting a tin can or something.
No, obviously not, because I present this information to you in a boring way by showing you screenshots of documents. So I'm not like trying to drum up something, right? This is the document that we all need to read. And there are some very concerning points, and I didn't make it up. And I've given you the opportunity to read it for yourself. So how could you say like, wow, this boring chick with the screenshots of PDFs is really a conspiracy theorist?
Well, to be fair, I haven't seen anyone say that. I haven't seen anyone say that. No, I'm just saying, like, it's kind of funny when you think about it. Like, people are like, wow, that must be the tinfoil hat show. No. These are literally from the World Health Organization. These are their own documents that you're going through. It's the craziest stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I did write this next slide. This is my summary of all of the CA+, the pandemic preparedness document that we will have the opportunity to opt in. Again, remember, these are the things that they want to then give themselves extra powers for, which we've gone over: define the next pandemic, determine lockdowns, give themselves surveillance, determine treatments, vaccine mandates, vaccine distributions, vaccine intellectual property, and redistribution of basically everything. Because if everything has the potential to be a pandemic, then the information we speak about, the way it hurts your feelings, your mental health, right? Everything that could be upsetting to you is something they need to manage, as well as, they are going to talk about redistribution of resources. We've talked about how they've given themselves the power to say, oh, because those farmers are next to that stream, that's not good. So we're going to, not allow these. We're going to make the governments close down these farms or these factories or what have you. That is written into that document. So, that will be on top of the new articles of organization that now has been put forward. So they're going to take this power whether we allow them or not. The pandemic preparedness document is one thing that we can say no to, maybe. Politicians in the UK have said they're supportive of this treaty, but, obviously we're not going to give away our own power. That's what they're saying, because there was a letter in the UK of, I believe, 30 foreign ministers who had expressed concerns about this. In the U.S. just today, we haven't seen it yet because we're doing this. New Jersey Representative Chris Smith is holding a hearing about this treaty today, and we're not exactly sure who will participate yet, and hopefully we can bring that to you tomorrow. But again, the World Health Organization has this treaty, has had it in the works for over a year. The final amendments to the treaty will be in July, we believe, and voting the next year. So let us know what you think of it.
And it's very odd that this World Health Organization document is 666 pages long.
Is it? Wait, what?
I'm just saying. No, I'm joking. That part I made up.
Well,
666.
I was like, I didn't read 600 pages.
666. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is, though, like with all of the powers that they're giving themselves in this document, are they giving themselves any checks and balances to like corruption or any abuses of the power, or are they just listing powers that they have and they're not putting any sort of like balancing in there, anybody to oversee what they're doing?
I mean,
do they?
I don't know how binding that would be, because it's like this person is the what is Dr. Tedros? The what's his title?
The head.
This person's the chair, and this person is the grand poobah, and this person is below the grand poobah, and they will have meetings to see how they're doing, and they will police each other thus. But it's not for us to ring in on. There's no public-facing accountability. I don't think that even gives member states the ability to ring in. I mean, they say they have a diverse board, so they will have people from all over the world ringing in, but it's very internal. And I think we can see how they have been working, especially during the pandemic. They didn't have checks on their power. They didn't have any, we weren't given any opportunity to give feedback. We weren't given any opportunity to vote. They approve who they want. In fact, they promote people who have been good soldiers of COVIDism. We spoke about the guy who was able to provide edits to the Nature journal that disproved the COVID lab leak. He was promoted inside the World Health Organization, and he worked with Dr. Fauci, and he basically wrote in foregone conclusions to a scientific paper about how COVID did not come from a lab, which was later refuted by military doctors. So we see this behavior. I don't think we're going to see like real democracy functioning inside of this. It's not possible that way.
It's not possible. When they're, as Philip pointed out earlier, when they're unaccountable, it's not possible. And so that's why you write a constitution. So you have checks and balances. You have a Supreme Court. You have a bicameral government that keeps each other in check.
And this is how you blow up a constitution, because you just take it and usurp it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who needs a federal constitution when you've got this? When you've got the World Health Organization?
Well, let us know. Again, we always link you to the original document that was in the newsletter today. If you think that we've missed something or misinterpreted, I am open to your opinions. Let us know in the comments below.
Absolutely. All right. We've got more news to get to. We're going to be joined by an excellent journalist, Alexander Pavic from Serbia, to talk about the latest NATO meddling in that country. And it's also interesting, the timing, isn't it? Wow. Suddenly there's all sorts of violence unfolding in Kosovo, right as they're attacking Moscow. Like, what is happening here? Isn't that interesting? All at the same time? Wow. It's amazing timing how all of this stuff happens at the same time, right? Don't be fooled. So we'll talk about that. But first, as an investor, are you looking for an easier way to trade some stocks? Would you like 20 free stocks right now? By the way, you have 2 days, today and tomorrow, for this 20 free stock offer because it's going away. That's right. Our friends at Moomoo, it's our favorite trading platform. There's no steep learning curve. It has a simple interface. It's easy to use, and you can get those 20 free stocks right now by opening an account and making your initial deposits by going to redacted.inc/Moomoo. Now, even if you do nothing else with the account, you make your initial deposit, you just sit on that account with those 20 free stocks, and you just do nothing and wait for them to rise. You wait for them to go up in value over the course of time. That's what you could do with it. Or you could go through some of their great learning platform information they have. They've got an entire university and school built into the app. So you can learn how to trade all inside the app and kind of take your time. Or you can do some research, set some alerts on some of your favorite companies. Like I invest in different gold producers and different commodity stocks. And so I do that right there very easily, set my market alerts, all of that right inside of Moomoo. Open your free Moomoo account today. Get access to 0 commission trades in 20 free stocks. When you open your account, make your initial deposits. Go to redacted.inc. It's not .com. It's redacted.inc/Moomoo. Again, redacted.inc/Moomoo. Well, why is NATO once again meddling in Serbia? Overnight in northern Kosovo, violence broke out between NATO forces and Serbian demonstrators who are protesting the most recent election, where a newly installed ethnic Albanian mayor was set to take office. The election was boycotted by the town's Serb majority, and the election had only 4% turnout. 4%. Serbia mobilized armored vehicles this morning, and President Vučić spoke on the NATO escalation overnight and again this morning. So the question is, are we headed for a repeat of what NATO did to Serbia in 1999? We sure hope not. Alexander Pavic is an independent journalist joining us from Serbia's capital of Belgrade. Alexander, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be with you as always.
Can you tell me where do things stand right now? What are you seeing from the powers that be? I understand that Vučić just spoke a short time ago, and what did he say?
He met this morning with the ambassadors of the so-called Quint countries. That's the United States, France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. And after the meeting, he said that the conditions for things calming down, the main two conditions are for the so-called Kosovo Special Police Forces to withdraw from the Serbian majority municipalities, and also for their fake mayors, as he called them, because as you rightly said, there are 4 Serbian majority municipalities in the north of Kosovo, and the total turnout was, like you said, around a little bit less than 4% in all 4 combined, because the Serbs boycotted the elections for various reasons. And what happened yesterday was...
Why did they boycott it? For our audience that doesn't know why they boycotted this election, why did they?
Well, because for the past months, we've had these special police forces, Albanian. They've been actually terrorizing the Serbian population in the north. They've been setting up checkpoints, arresting people, stopping people, just trying to intimidate people, breaking into their houses. And, that's just one of the things. Other things, such as license plates. That's an issue that's been going on for years. But this so-called prime minister, Albin Kurti, Kosovo Albanian, who has tacit support of the entire NATO and the EU, he's just been trying to escalate the situation. He's trying to provoke a response from Belgrade. It's obvious, because it's obvious that I think the whole tactic is to cause a new clash between Serbia and NATO. As a kind of a trigger to have another NATO intervention like we had in 1999, only to finish the job which they obviously didn't finish then.
What would the job look like to be finished by NATO standards?
Well, we can see what they did in Croatia in '95. They actually allowed Croatia to ethnically cleanse the remaining 250,000 Serbs that were, in Serb majority parts of Croatia, and then they called it peace. So that's what the goal is, because the thing is, the Serbs, both in Serbia and the Serbs in Bosnia, they refused to join NATO for various reasons. As a result, we're all seen by NATO as some kind of let's say a factor that should be neutralized or eliminated if possible. And as a result, especially in Kosovo, where there's a big American military base, Serb population there just wouldn't accept such a thing. So it's better to have a totally compliant Albanian population, oblivious to what's going on in that base, just to make it safe for NATO to deploy in part of Serbia, which is Kosovo. So that's the main reason, really. NATO wants to totally close the space, control the space in Europe, so that they totally concentrate on Russia. And the Serbs are, again, behind the front, and they just they haven't succeeded in pacifying us yet. So this is what they're trying to do.
You recently wrote a piece on, after 15 years of, quote, independence, it's clear that Kosovo was a stepping stone for NATO's imperial goals. And it seems to be the sentiment that this is, of course, being used by NATO, right? That's exactly what's happening here.
Absolutely. The other thing is the Serbian government has refused, one of the few governments in Europe that have refused to impose sanctions on Russia. That's the other thing that's bothering them. But, I go back to, I think we should all know the root causes. And there's a very interesting document. I've sent it to you a couple of months back. I think people should know why this U.S. involvement. It has really nothing to do with restoring anyone's human rights or protecting them. I refer to this little-known document from 2000. This was this security conference in Bratislava. We wouldn't have a record of it, but the German chancellor at the time, Gerhard Schroeder, he sent an envoy who was there, and he wrote a report on it. A high-level German politician. He was their deputy defense minister for a while. His name is Willy Wimmer, and he published a brief report on what he wrote to his chancellor at the time, and this was what he heard that American officials said, why they bombed Serbia in 1999, and this is very important. He said that Kosovo was occupied by NATO and by American forces to rectify Eisenhower's mistake from 1945, when he didn't succeed in deploying U.S. troops on that territory. This was a way of rectifying it. And the other thing is the goal. This is May 2000. The goal stated by high Pentagon and State Department officials at the time was that the goal is to expand to the maximum limits of the old Roman Empire to the east, meaning that all states between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea are to be integrated into NATO. Well, guess what? That's what happened over the. We had several waves of NATO expansion afterwards. So even in 2000, call the Russians paranoid. Even in 2000, they had imperial plans of restoring the Roman Empire and expanding to the east.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And it makes perfect sense, of course.
Yeah.
This is why NATO is there. What about Russia? The big question this morning is, where does Russia come in on this?
Okay, Russia, this morning we had a statement from a Russian diplomat in Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov. He's an ambassador with international organizations in Vienna. He said, he reminded everyone that according to resolution, Security Council Resolution 1244, which is the basis for NATO being deployed in Kosovo as peacekeepers.
Right.
This was back in 1999. That's how the peace was achieved. He said Serbia has a right to return up to 1,000 military and security personnel to Kosovo. And NATO has been refusing to grant this right to Serbia. And that's international law. So this morning, Russia just reminded everyone of that fact. And it's true. So meaning if you had to defend the Serbs in the north from this terror that they're being subjected to, they would have a legal right to send in up to 1,000 of military or police forces. But NATO, of course, does not recognize what they signed themselves in 1999. So I think Russia is going to try to support Serbia, whatever it thinks it deems necessary. And the president of Serbia last night said very clearly, he said that if Kosovo Special Police Forces, if they fire upon Serb civilians again, that the Serbian military, which is deployed at the administrative border, is going to act differently. He didn't say what he meant by that, but I mean, we can guess what he means by that.
Here we go again. Where do you think things go from here, Alexander? I'll get you out of here on that question. Where do you, when you talk to citizens at the cafes and the coffee shops, what does the citizenry think?
Well, the thing is, the Western powers, because of this is the United States actually, they've just their goal is to make Serbia recognize the independence of Kosovo. And they're not going to give up on that. The thing is, the actions of the United States and the EU countries, what they're doing is that they're actually encouraging this sort of behavior from the Kosovo Albanian leadership. And so we don't expect peace to come because they're just obviously the so-called Prime Minister of Kosovo, Albin Kurti, he's acting like he has a green light from NATO to do whatever he wants. So even if they stop him temporarily, they're not going to give up on their goal of integrating Serbia into NATO one way or another, pacifying us, installing some sort of cooperative government that will institute sanctions against Russia. So we're in for some kind of struggle. We accept it. But so far we have, let's say we have diplomatic support from Russia and China. And we'll see if things heat up. I think if a government in Belgrade asked openly Moscow for help, Moscow would not refuse to help them.
And I have to think, I mean, this is the cynic in me, Alexander, but I've been around too long in this business, and I see how these things unfold. As the United States and NATO is about to launch something in Ukraine, suddenly things start popping up in other parts of the world. It's very interesting how suddenly things start happening in Kosovo when we keep hearing about a massive spring offensive about to unfold in Ukraine. So, am I cynical?
Worse, you're like a conspiracy theorist. And,
I know.
But actually, a conspiracy theorist is someone who sees things before everyone else sees them. I mean, I sympathize because I've been called one many times myself, but no, I think you're totally realistic. Obviously, this is being seen as some sort of a total war. And if Kosovo, Ukraine, just parts of the chessboard, unfortunately. So I agree with you. It's all linked. It's all linked. And they just might, if things are going badly in Ukraine, they just might light a fuse here in Kosovo, just as a diversion tactic to try to maybe make the Russians react to a call for help. So I think they're using the entire world as their chessboard. So it's linked. I totally agree with you. I think that's a great point you just made.
Well, if you want to read more of Alexander's great writings, we will link it up in the description below. He's an excellent journalist, and we thank you all for subscribing to this channel because we're able to give voice to these great journalists like Alexander, who's doing amazing work. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll watch what's happening in Serbia. We love the Serbian people here, and we hope that blood is not shed. Alexander, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Clayton. Thanks for your interest, and thanks for bringing this to a wide audience, to your big audience who knows how to think and who wants to know what's really happening in the world.
Well, thank you for contextualizing it and really making it easy for our audience to really digest this. Thank you so much again.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alexander, and we really appreciate that. And I love what he said about our audience, which is a thinking man's audience, a thinking woman's audience,
paying attention.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Speaking of thinking, while he was talking, I was thinking like it's interesting to me that you've got this situation where NATO is trying to force somebody that wants independence and somebody else that's part of that country like doesn't want it, and so NATO's trying to force them to accept that independence. But if you reverse that, where somebody's trying to get independence and NATO's like, no, you can't have independence, talking specifically about Ukraine.
Yes.
Like where you got like the Donbass, these places that voted for their independence, and you've got NATO saying, no, you can't do that. Like it's just interesting to me how they never stop and look at it and go, if you neutralize all the names in it, the actions are the exact reverse, and they back both philosophies.
Right.
It just blows my mind.
Turnout in the referendum election in the Donbass was in the 90%, right? Yeah. For people who voted there. And that election they say was a sham. But 4% election in Kosovo, and they're like, good
4%. Yeah. What a turnout.
It's legit. It's the will of the people.
It's so much better than 3. It's so much better than 3%. Come on.
What a sham. I saw someone in the chat just now saying Clayton should do a sub-a-thon. which I think means a subscription-a-thon, like a telethon, I guess. I don't know how many plans for that, but we should just say, hey, please subscribe to the channel. We look at the analytics, and like over 50% of you are actually not even subscribed to the channel. You watch us, but you're not subscribed. I know that YouTube loves to unsubscribe people. This happens all the time. So please just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Just click on that. It's totally free to subscribe to our channel. Also on Rumble. All of you great people watching us on Rumble right now as well. I think on Rumble we're about to hit, we're at 333,000 followers on Rumble, which is awesome. So all 17,000 of the people watching on Rumble right now, please hit that follow button. The same thing on YouTube, if you'd hit that subscribe button. We're live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time here. Monday through Thursday we do this show. We took off yesterday for the holiday. But we've got more news to get to here on this Tuesday. We are going to talk about Max Blumenthal. Now I sat down, had a chance to chat with Max about this DIA app and how Ukraine is being totally watched and tracked every step of the way. It is a test bed for an app that will be coming to you. Mark my words, it will be coming to you. They will track every transaction that you make. They will watch and be able to monitor your movements. They're already rolling this DIA app out, not only in Ukraine, but they're rolling out, of course, in other parts of the world. They're rolling it out in Colombia. They're rolling it out in other parts of Latin America and a number of African nations as well. So we're going to speak with Max on that story. But first, we should mention our newsletter. We didn't even mention it yet today.
Haven't we? Oh, yeah, we just got straight to the news. Well, let us tell you about the newsletter. It comes to you every day that this show comes. You go to redacted.inc. Subscribe to the newsletter. All you have to do is put in your name and your email address. In fact, we don't even need your first name, just your email address. And we send it to you daily. It is a compendium of your hottest global issues stories, plus some kind of fun stuff. Clayton's really good with the quips and the headlines and the GIFs. He's a GIFer.
Give one for the GIFer. I like to we try to make you laugh in the morning. I try to put in a few jokes and make you laugh.
He likes the GIFs as opposed to the GITs. He's not a GIT.
No, I'm not a GIT.
I don't know how to use that word properly because I'm not English, but yes. So the newsletter, and again, because so many of you like to have original links to the stories that we do here on this show, subscribe to the newsletter and you'll have them for yourself. I try really hard when I link to things to make sure you're getting the original sourcing, or you can see the original documents so that you don't have to take my word for it. Or if you don't like my interpretation, you can read for yourself and let me know. I appreciate that. So again, it's totally free. Go to redacted.inc and sign up for our newsletter. Once again, that's redacted.inc.
Well, a story we've been covering here at Redacted for a number of months is the rollout of the DIA program, the DIA Super App, which is, of course, a program between Google and Visa and supported, of course, by U.S. aid and your tax dollars to make sure that all Ukrainians are surveilled, their banking information is surveilled, and they can even snitch on their neighbors if they think that they are Russian sympathizers. Just go right to the DIA app. Hey, my neighbor might be associated with Russia. Can you go and make that person disappear? That's how the DIA app works. And this was rolled out in Washington, D.C. as a big event this past week. Max Blumenthal from the Grayzone somehow managed to get in and get a ticket and was in the audience for this big event. And there's a lot of moments in this event that I want to get Max's take on. So Max from the Grayzone is back with us here. Max, great to see you.
Good to see you.
So you were at this DIA rollout event, and it's amazing when you're sitting there in the audience, you see on the stage all of the players associated with this, like they have their logos up on the screen, right? You've got Google, Visa, US aid, all pouring billions of dollars into this program, which for those people who don't understand DIA, it really is like Ukraine has become like the petri dish, the test ground for them to roll out this full-time surveillance with a smartphone. Is that not how it works?
Completely. I mean, Zelensky calls this the state within a smartphone and the future of e-governance.
And the heartbeat, right? He says like you can feel like Ukraine's heartbeat within this smartphone, within this app. It's the state right in your hand, the government in your hand.
Yeah, when your phone buzzes, then because you have an alert, That's the heartbeat of the state, according to Zelensky, at a speech where? At the Spook Fest, the spook mecca of Stanford.
That's where he made that speech? That was the speech where he had, yeah. So I want to play a little bit of that. This is Zelensky sort of announcing and talking about Dia. Let's play a little bit of Zelensky, because they put him up on stage on the big screen so he could really introduce what Dia is all about. Take a look.
Apple, iPhone. І це його серце. І воно б'ється з кожним вібро під час дзвінка або під час СМС. А в ньому наше українське творіння «Держава у смартфоні». Мільйони українців щоденно користуються нашим державним сервісом «Дія».
Okay, so it is the heartbeat of Ukraine. One thing, of course, that he doesn't say or doesn't talk about is the surveillance piece of this. And that was another part of this program, Max. I just want to play a little clip of this. You captured this footage from the event where they're talking about, hey, if you've got a neighbor that you think is a Russian sympathizer, all you need to do, there's even a drone program game within the app where you can like basically almost drop a drone bomb on your friend. Like that's how this works. Take a look. This is ridiculous.
E-Enemy, a chatbot that helps any citizen safely transfer info about the location of Russian troops, names of collaborators, and enemy movements to the armed forces. Numerous attacks of Russian army destroyed a number of TV towers. To provide Ukrainians with uninterrupted access to information, we launched Dia Radio and Dia TV, so that even under blackouts, millions could feel present.
So Max, so it has built-in snitching is what this app does as well.
If you suspect that your neighbor is a Russian collaborator, or if you're having a dispute with your neighbor and you want to make them go away, in other words, you want to have Ukrainian death squads run by the SBU security services come, snatch your neighbor, disappear them, and have them wind up in a ditch, well, you can do it with the click of a single button within the state in a smartphone app known as Dia, and it was promoted as such. We've actually seen what's been happening to accused collaborators all across Ukraine. There's video of them going up on the Telegram channels of neo-Nazi accounts inside Ukraine, showing them throwing bodies into mass graves. And mayors have been assassinated after being accused of collaborating with Russia. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry is presiding over this entire program, and every single opposition party has been outlawed. The main party that was Zelensky's Democratic rival, Patriots for Life. I mean, we've seen their deputies rounded up and disappeared, killed. Their leader, Viktor Medvedchuk, was taken away and thrown in a military prison, roughed up. This is the reality of Ukraine today, and this smartphone app is enabling it, and they're promoting it at a Hollywood-style event with the director of USAID, Samantha Power, on stage, along with probably the most famous tech journalist in America, Kara Swisher, sitting right there.
Kara Swisher, who, as we've talked about here on the show in the past, is really a mouthpiece for a lot of these different tech events. I'd be curious to know how much they pay her to MC these events. We saw her on stage with Yoel Roth most recently. She does these events. So she was there with Samantha Power, and she brought up the corruption. Samantha Power acknowledged that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt governments in Europe, and that they've still got a lot of corruption. But because of the Dia app specifically, that's how we managed to funnel $15 billion, I should say launder $15 billion to Ukraine. Watch this amazing moment.
One of the things that Congress has given U.S. aid since this full-scale invasion began is an unprecedented amount of money in direct budget support, which sounds kind of obvious. Of course, we would do that. We want to stand with Ukraine, but it's totally unprecedented, this kind of scale of investment. And we're talking along the lines of about $15 billion in a sense, cash to the Ukrainian government, which was famously corrupt, you know, in past years, and still has work, as you noted, to do on corruption today. I don't know if we could have gotten that money out of Congress if not for Dia. Because what Dia allows us to do is that direct budget support goes, yes, to the Ukrainian government, but then it goes to pay teachers, to pay healthcare workers, to pay first responders. And there's a digital trail. It's not, you know, some official deciding this or that. It actually is going directly into the bank accounts in a manner that just it would have been untraceable in a prior regime.
So Max, she acknowledges the corruption, and she basically says that Congress really wouldn't have probably approved this if it went through normal channels, but because of the DIA app, we can literally launder money right into Ukraine this way. We can funnel it and go around the normal protocols.
Right. And directly pay doctors, teachers, healthcare workers. So pretty much any public employee in Ukraine is being paid by you, the American taxpayer, while teachers in Los Angeles have to go on strike for decent wages. And they're paying them through this shady experimental app. And we're supposed to believe that that roots out corruption. I mean, the entire scheme of us giving record amounts of money that Congress would have never approved were it not for a totalitarian digital ID app is in itself, it should be a major scandal.
You also had a chance, you got roughed up a little bit by some of the security that was there. The U.S. aid guy, this U.S. aid guy kept showing up in your videos, putting a hand in front of the camera. I just want to play a few of those moments. Here's one of them and get you to talk about this. After the event, you had a chance to speak with Eurasia Foundation head, I guess it was the head of Pamela Spratlin.
Yes, she's a former U.S. ambassador.
Okay, that's right. That's
Kyrgyzstan.
Right. So she was on stage beside the chairman of Visa, and who was talking about this new app. So I want to play your interactions with her.
This event was about profiting off of war, turning Ukraine into a laboratory, the ruins of Ukraine into a laboratory for the fourth industrial revolution.
You're absolutely
getting
wrong.
Ukrainians all in a digital.
Now, you're not interested in the answer?
Please. And can you tell me why my colleague Anya Parnell is on a kill list maintained by your government? Your Interior Ministry maintains a kill list of journalists, and my partner here, Anya Parnell, is on it.
Unlike in Ukraine, you can't kill and ban your opposition here. Our Nazis actually have to hide behind the government, not serve in the government.
I thought it was quite interesting.
So it appeared like she was about to answer you, but before the U.S. aid guy gets in the way, what were you trying to get out of her?
Well, I was just wondering if she was ashamed to be at an event where war profiteers, like the head of Visa, were so proudly discussing their efforts to turn Ukraine into a laboratory, to turn the ravages of Ukraine into a laboratory. I mean, no one was on stage talking about ending the war or a negotiated settlement or peace. They were clearly talking about how to harvest more money and data from Ukrainians. And here you have Pamela Spratlin just brought out to stand beside the head of Visa. She said basically nothing. And I just wanted to know what she thought of that, and if she actually believed that this was about war profiteering, when it just so clearly was. And I didn't get to answer. The guy who was pushing me, I later found out, is named Alex Howard, and he's the head of something called Digital Democracy, which is, it seems to be a USAID initiative, or it's sponsored by USAID or the State Department to train people in countries across Eastern Europe and other frontiers of U.S. regime change and internet literacy and so on. So he was forcefully shoving me, and I told him, if you're not security, you should get your hands off me. And then he continued to kind of manage me.
Yeah, he did it too. When you were speaking with the U.S. ambassador, Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Yeah, you were asking her specifically about this, using Ukraine as basically a petri dish, right? You were asking again this proving ground for all of this stuff, right?
Yeah, just kind of a moral question, whether they think it's okay to surrender their country and their country's citizens to these multinational financial interests and tech overlords, to use them as test dummies in a scheme to accelerate the fourth industrial revolution, or what World Economic Forum chief Klaus Schwab calls the Great Reset, where ultimately the biological is merged with the digital. And it's no surprise that this DIA app was actually rolled out at the 2023 World Economic Forum that Schwab controls, and that Mikhailo Fedorov, the head of digital transformation for Ukraine, was on stage there delivering an even longer performance, TED Talk style performance, than the one he delivered in DC. But this was about bringing home the DIA app for a Hollywood style DC rollout at the Warner Theater, which is one of the most prestigious theaters in downtown DC.
But that doesn't stop with Ukraine. Of course, we're already seeing the groundwork being laid for African nations as well. And this is, so the test bed is in Ukraine, but it's going to expand, is it not?
Well, that's the point. And that's what's so sickening and dystopian about this. Ukraine's being used precisely because it is not a democracy, because citizens have no power there whatsoever. They have no privacy rights. And this app, there's no question that this app has to rely on geolocation so it can be used to prevent citizens from escaping conscription. We've seen those videos, I'm sure you've reported on it, of young men being rounded up by military police and thrown in vans. How do they find them so easily? And once the rest of us are put in this system of control and we no longer have access to finance outside of central bank digital currency, and we have to produce digital proof of our vaccination through digital ID in order to travel, we are complete prisoners in a totalitarian digital fourth industrial revolution global prison. So Ukraine is being used to accelerate this process, and then it's being exported to other nations where citizens have the least power, nations that are tools of Western empire, like Zambia and Colombia. These are nations that were announced as adopting the DIA program. Zanzibar is also next. I saw several African diplomats, representatives of embassies in DC at the event. And it's also part of the great power competition with China, competing with the Belt and Road Initiative, because China is also doing AI and using digital ID all across the world.
The new frontier. Yeah. So we go into the countries that are totally destabilized. It's a perfect test bed. The countries that we've destabilized, we get to go in and then we install this draconian system. Everyone should check out the Grace. Go ahead.
And just one last point. I mean, this all came in through Zelensky. There was the U.S.-backed coup in 2014, the Maidan coup that brought in a new regime and NATO-backed regime in Ukraine. But none of this was taking place until Zelensky came in, whose campaign was run by American advisors, including Nina Jankowicz. So it really shows what Zelensky represents. He represents NATO, but he also represents Davos.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Such a great point. Max Blumenthal from the Grayzone. Read their website. It's one of those websites. If you bookmark like one or two websites in your life, like this should be one of them, thegrayzone.com. Go read it every day. It's excellent journalism, one of the best, really, I can count on like one hand websites or companies that are doing the kind of journalism that the Grayzone does. Max, great to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thanks so much, Clayton.
And thanks to Max, and thanks to all of you for subscribing, because that's part of the deal here. We're able to bring on amazing independent journalists like Max Blumenthal here on the channel, and we couldn't do it without you subscribing to the channel. So if you'd be so kind, just hit that subscribe button, whether on YouTube or Rumble or on Twitter. We're streaming live on Twitter as well. Just hit that subscribe button. It really, really helps. And share the show with a friend. Just text it to a friend. Share it on social media. And just say, hey, you got to watch this. Because, we want to give voice to these independent journalists who are doing the real work. The corporate media, of course, has been lying to us for years. So thank you guys so much for subscribing to the channel, being a part of our great community here. We really appreciate it. Also, I should mention we have a daily newsletter. If you're not subscribed to that, that's totally free. Go to redacted.inc and click on the join the newsletter button right there, and then put in your email address. And then you'll receive a welcome email from me, from Clayton at redacted.inc. You just need to verify that. So go to your spam folder, wherever and junk folder. And if you see a welcome email from me, just drag that over to your inbox and then verify that you want to receive the newsletter. And then we cover about 4 or 5 of the big stories of the day in the newsletter. We really work hard on it. Natalie does a great job writing it, and I do the editing and add some other things into the newsletter as well. So you'll receive it over your cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Again, redacted.inc is the place to go to subscribe. And thank you guys so much for being a part of our great community here on Redacted. And we will see you back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Bye now.